Hello, listeners, and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are the Geek Show's podcast dedicated to the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies, either starring, about, or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a filmmaker and critic for thegeekshow.co.uk and Horrified, the British horror website. And I have been joined this week by...
Hi, I'm Sarah Hayton, and I'm a writer and sometime director. And cheers.
Cheers.
I've brought a little glass of wine along.
Nice.
Because I'm really interested in talking about tonight's film. And where do you want to start?
Well, first of all, let's consider that there is a certain risk involved in directors from non-English speaking countries making English language movies. For every Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain, there is an equal and opposite Ang Lee's Gemini Man. And on its release in 2007, Wong Kar-Wai's sole Anglophone film, My Blueberry Nights, was tepidly received. Perhaps it was the middling festival reviews, perhaps it was the unconventional casting which placed jazz singer Norah Jones in the middle of a throng of movie stars, or perhaps it's just the fact that it was called My Blueberry Nights, a phrase which you occasionally have to remind yourself was considered a good title for a film by somebody once. Regardless, we at Pop Screen feel it's worth disinterring and considering its rare acting role for Jones, as well as a notable cameo by wayward alt-rock chanteuse Shan Marshall, aka Cat Power, who has just announced a new album, a new covers album, by the way, so I'm very excited about that.
Right, who's this Cat Power woman? Is she the woman who did that documentary?
No, you're thinking of Werner Herzog. She's...
No, I'm not. No, I am not.
I am not.
I am not.
I have no idea who you are thinking of.
No, I was thinking of the woman who'd done the documentary about New York and stuff in New York.
Oh, right.
I'm sure you mentioned it recently, and
yeah,
it was to do with like sort of pop stars in New York, and that's all I can remember, I think.
We spoke a bit about Fran Lebowitz on the last show, didn't we? Who is a professional talker about New York, but I can't remember talking about anyway, Cat Power.
Cat Power.
Yeah.
He's such a great character, Fran Lebowitz, but at the same time I'm a little bit bored. So carry on, Cat Power.
Yeah, absolutely. Cat Power has
terrible. I know I'm supposed to really like, Fran Lebowitz, and I know I'm continuing to talk about this person, and we have moved on from her, but how is it a thing, and like people are still like interested in it, and you're watching it, and it's like, I'm sorry, how did this get made?
Yeah, I feel absolutely the same way about Fran Lebowitz, and I just think New York in general is like the city that never shuts up about itself. It bothers me a lot.
Yeah, like that song by Frank Sinatra, "The city that never shuts up about itself."
Yeah, what was it called? New York, open brackets, pack it in for a bit, mate, close brackets.
New York, shut the hell up.
I'm so over your New York thing. Yeah. Cat Power has a one scene cameo in this that you may remember because she is very compelling on screen. She's Jude Law's character's ex-girlfriend, Katya, who comes back in one scene. And
she turns up at the door.
She's great. I'm surprised you're not a Cat Power fan, because I think her music would be right up your street. I will.
Yeah, and I think it's just maybe because I'm not aware of her, which is Shameful, but I do spend a lot of time on my own. Okay, so Cat Power, is that K-A-T Power?
No, it's C-A-T. It's a stage name. Her actual name is Chan Marshall. But she's been going like since the mid-90s, but she had a breakthrough around the turn of the millennium when she did her first covers album, which featured like a really spooky, deconstructed version of I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones, among many other delights. And there's actually a couple of songs by her on the soundtrack here, particularly towards the start where we're in the diner. The opening song is Norah Jones, but the stuff that's playing in the diner,
song is Norah Jones. Yeah.
The stuff that's playing in the diner is all Cat Power.
Right. So I can see here she's worked with Liz Phair, Sonic Youth, Eddie Vedder. So there's some, obviously she's well thought of by the great and the good.
Absolutely, yeah. And the album that she had out like around the time she was making this is called The Greatest, and she recorded it with I think it was musicians who were in Al Green's old backing band.
Oh, that's lovely. That's a lovely sound to go for.
It is indeed The Greatest. It is such a good album.
I bet that's got a beautiful sound.
Absolutely, yeah.
So around the year 2000, it was called the Covers record, and that's what you were talking about previously.
That was the one with Satisfaction on, yeah. Every now and then she does a record of covers, and she is one of those people who can make you forget that someone else has done a song that she's covering. She is very good at covers.
Oh, that's really good. That's a rare gift, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I like cover versions. I find them interesting, but there aren't many artists who I think are reliably good at it. Johnny Cash, obviously, that's like...
Oh my God, yeah. Reduce you to liquid. Absolutely, Johnny Cash. But have you considered the Mike Flowers Pop Quintet? Mike Flowers Pop. Mike Flowers Pops. It is, yeah.
It's almost cheating to cover an Oasis song because you can't make it any worse.
But it's so like, oh man, I was properly into lounge at the time, and I was just like, oh God, this is the best thing I've ever heard.
Combustible Edison and all that stuff, was it?
there's so many great tracks on that record. It's and it made me think, oh gosh, have I completely not seen a genre of music called lounge? And it's, there's that, and there's like all the stuff that you get in films like like 60s films and 60s
like the original version of Casino Royale.
Yes, yeah. And what's it called? Honestly, I'm so sorry about my memory. It is rubbish, but the guy who's in it is James Coburn. And it's a comedy. It's kind of like along the lines of Austin Powers.
Oh, Our Man Flint.
Yes,
Our Man Flint. Yeah,
and it's got that kind of type music with like lots of emphasis on the triangle, and it just made me think, oh gosh, is this like a whole genre of music I've kind of not noticed? And definitely worth investigating. So I heard loads of stuff by Lalo Schifrin. Lalo Schifrin, and lots of film soundtrack stuff, and sort of almost like, I suppose some people would call it elevator music at the time, but it just sounds so good and like encapsulating a period. Yeah. So yeah,
it's weird that because it's one of those things that I always associate with the mid-90s, even though it is not mid-90s music. It just had such a sustained comeback.
Yeah, definitely. It made a definite point there.
I was not expecting to go on a Mike Flowers Pops tangent when we started this. I've got to admit, that was quite low down the list.
Well, happy to help.
But this is the first one that we've done that you hadn't seen before, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no recollection of seeing it at the time, and I think I would have remembered it because it well, I don't know whether I would have remembered, because it does have a, I don't know, lack of a punch, lack of an impact. It's not really saying anything unique or challenging, or I don't know whether I would have remembered it. And I'm not particularly a Jude Law fan, although I do like Norah Jones.
See, Jude Law, I think we should say, has one of the great spoonerizable names, doesn't he?
I had not considered that before, but yes, you are not wrong.
So there's that. He's got that in his corner. Yeah, it's funny. I actually consider Jude Law a really reliable actor, and he generally makes me enjoy things more. But in this, I can say, like, if I'm being kind, he sometimes remembers that his character is from Manchester.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, that's probably the most obvious problem. But I have this, unfortunately, a dislike of this actor, and I've never met him. I don't know him. He might be a perfectly lovely person, but because he's associated with the lad culture of the 90s,
Yes.
I really don't react to him very positively at all. And in this, I'm just thinking, oh my God, he's just like putting on this character that's absolutely not him, because of that lad thing of the 90s. So I just couldn't believe him from the get-go.
There's a whole cadre of actors that I've sometimes had cause to reassess, but that I just got off on the wrong foot with, because when I was getting into films, they were just in every single crap British gangster movie. And yeah, it maybe did take me a while to come back around to Jude Law. It didn't take me as long as it did with Reese Fans, who was like the face of that subgenre, and who I now think is a perfectly good actor. But Jesus Christ, he didn't have appear in some stinkers.
I don't remember. I mean, I've probably not seen a load of his. I just remember him for the romantic comedies, probably of the 90s and that sort of time. But I mean, I've seen him do some really good solid work.
Absolutely.
I respect him.
Yeah. Now, I did see My Blueberry Nights when it came out, because at that point I was a really big Wong Kar-Wai fan. And I mean, in terms of his earlier work, I still am. I still think that there's a solid stretch from maybe Chungking Express through to In the Mood for Love, where that is one of the hottest streaks any director's been on, in my opinion. And I was really looking forward to this. And
despite the reviews.
Despite the reviews. And it's funny, because watching it again, I don't think it's any better, but I was surprised at how much of it stuck in my head.
So you've remembered quite a lot of quite a forgettable film.
Bit weird, that, isn't it? It's, I suppose when you say forgettable, you're saying it's possible to forget it. I have not, but I could if I wanted to.
If you really tried harder, Graham. I'm coming at Wong Kar-Wai from, I've not known his films before. And I just remember when I was at university, and there were people who were crazy about Wong Kar-Wai and used to rave about him and catch all the films and everything, and would get VHS copies of it.
Not that we're dating ourselves here, but yeah.
Now, my housemates at the time worked at Blockbuster, so we started off with Video Wall, and then it moved into Video Corner, and then it turned into Video Annex. We had loads of VHS stuff, but I didn't get into Wong Kar-Wai at the time. It was one of those things that I always thought, oh, it sounds great, I should definitely watch his stuff. But now, like 20 years later, I still haven't done that, which makes me think maybe it's never going to happen. I don't know.
His career path is really interesting, because like his golden age was built on something that became his fatal flaw. If Shakespeare was alive today, he wouldn't be writing for EastEnders, as every sort of pub boss is. He would be writing a biopic of Wong Kar-Wai, because it's the perfect tragic downfall story.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, the thing is, he has a very loose way of working. He likes a lot of improvisation. He doesn't like to even plan out the structure of his films before he shoots.
No, what, really? Not even the structure?
No, there is a script, but he departs from it as soon as he can. And I think
that's interesting.
The reason for this was because I think it was his third feature, Ashes of Time, was like one of those big wuxia epics that any reasonably prominent director from that part of the world seems to like have to do at some point. And he hated it. He hated having to plan things out. He hated having to plan stunts before, like months before the filming started. He hated the period setting. He never found a cut of it that really worked. He re-edited it a bit later, but the third act is still incoherent, I think.
So, I mean, is that because I can understand that, because when you're a director, you're making a beautiful piece of art. But when you're talking about the intimate details of which car you're going to use for a backflip explosion stunt, it really takes away from that. It like gets down to the really boring forms you have to fill in and the insurance and everything. And if you're like him, what he sounds like, he's like a very pure kind of more of an artistic person rather than pragmatic planning, everything in its place type person.
Absolutely,
then
yeah.
you
I
can
remember
understand
Wim
why it would be
Wenders.
problematic for him.
It sort of was, yeah, but for a while it was like the engine of what was great about him, because straight after he did Ashes of Time, he did Chungking Express, which was the film that broke him in the West, and it's beautiful. It's such a great film, and it, unlike a lot of improvised films, it feels ad-libbed, but in a good way. It genuinely feels like it's sort of drifting along and anything can happen next. And he shot a lot for it.
Yeah.
He cut out one subplot, which turned into his next film, Fallen Angels, which is my personal favorite. And he kept going like this for a bit. But the problem is, I think, that when your whole directorial personality is based on just sort of shooting and waiting for something good to turn up, when something good doesn't turn up, you kind of don't have a strategy.
Yeah, exactly. So it must have been quite a culture shock to be plonked in the middle of Hollywood then, and given their rigid structures of storytelling. And in particular, this was, what date was this? This was the 2007 or
2007, yeah.
So to me, it feels like an earlier film. It feels like it feels like a 90s film. I don't know why I placed it there, but
I think it's because, well, Wong Kar-Wai broke through in the 90s, and I think his aesthetic was such a big part of defining what was cool cinematically that decade. So when you see, I think so, yeah, I would argue it was, because Quentin Tarantino, when he was like at the peak of his abilities as a tastemaker, really got behind Chungking Express and promoted it in the US. So there's a kind of sort of, there's a bridge there,
What I'm having difficulty getting my head around is that if he is somebody who can't quite get to grips with structure and form, what is it that's, I don't know, rated by Tarantino and the rest? Because Tarantino famously plays with structure.
Yeah. But I think at his best, Kar-Wai's films feel like they have a really surprising and inventive script. Like if you watch In the Mood for Love, which, by the way, everyone should, it's great, you would think that was some beautiful, like intricate short story that he'd adapted. It seems so perfectly structured, but he only got it so perfectly structured by excising large parts of the material, one of which involved a man at a diner that was frequented by lonely people who'd recently been through a breakup, which, you see where I'm going with this?
Expand for those of us that are not.
it became the
Oh, I
Jude
see,
Law
yes.
segment. When we said the
Sorry, I
film
thought
was
you were
forgettable,
going.
listeners, we were not joking.
Just in a matter of days. No, I thought you were going to go on to say another Wong Kar-Wai film or a Tarantino film.
No, I thought you were playing the comic role that Simon Mayo plays on the Radio 5 film show, but
I can do that. I can totally be that person.
all it takes is another glass of wine.
One thing I was going to ask, in The Mood for Love,
Yeah.
if you were saying that he shot a lot of material and then sort of edited it and whittled it down later, which is a nice kind of carpentry approach to things.
Mm-hmm.
Just do you know what the ratio is there? Is there a lot of waste?
It's a great question, and I don't know. I know that it's not unusual for him to it's not a case of he shoots the film and then he re-edits it into 2 or 3 more films. It's not that simple, but
It wouldn't be, no.
It's often the case that something he has cut from a film will become the seed of his next one. And in The Mood for Love, like I say, it had the original version of My Blueberry Nights was part of it, and his next film 2046 was also based on material he'd cut from In the Mood for Love as well. So there's a lot is what I'm suggesting.
Seems like there's a lot. Did I hear recently about another Beatles documentary, and I was surprised about the amount of stuff that's been shot and just kept on the shelf for ages.
Yeah, and you think that's about the Beatles, who, I mean, I'm not an economist, but I think there's a market for Beatles related stuff, right?
Yeah, massively.
Yes.
Massively. Even just like, John goes into the supermarket, or just the really banal daily stuff that you get.
The maddest thing about Kar-Wai's recent career, which has slowed down a lot, and the films have not been as well received, which suggests that this kind of domino rally method of production, where you make something and it sparks the next film, which sparks the next film, might have petered out. But the maddest thing is that in the very early days of Amazon Prime, when they were trying to launch that as a streaming service rather than just a place where you can order stuff, they signed him up to do a TV series. And you think, all right, this is someone whose most recent film took 7 years to make, and it's about 100 minutes long, and you want him to make 10 hours of television every year.
Not a great move, I would think.
Not a great plan. No, didn't get made, surprisingly.
I mean,
yeah.
If you, I mean, I kind of like that organic approach. That seems like a nice idea. So this is kind of a natural approach as well. It's the same approach that a sycamore tree will take. So it shoots off loads of flipping keys that come floating to the ground for however many yards around, but only a fraction of them grow. And then that's the next generation of trees, and it seems like that's the same approach that Kar-Wai is taking.
Yeah, and it's probably a stage that every creative person goes through. It's just that you don't normally have that stage of the project when the cameras are rolling. But I've been trying to think of another director who makes that work more consistently. I mean, Robert Altman did it a fair bit, but the thing with Robert Altman was he could make these big sprawling 3-hour epics that are full of stars improvising, but he could also do a 90-minute adaptation of a 2-man stage play. And I think it's the inability to do the second bit that has put Kar-Wai in a bit of trouble in recent years.
I don't know. I think it makes him a purer artist. I think, if he goes through phases, so much the better. But if he's chosen and found his lifelong métier, then
fair point.
just the way it is.
Yeah.
Why is he less popular, do you think? Why has his popularity waned?
I think the most basic answer is the films weren't as good anymore. I think that My Blueberry Nights, while I do not think it's a disaster by any means, is way below the level of his Hong Kong films. I haven't seen The Grandmaster, but which is the film that he did a few years after this, but I haven't heard great things. And there's also the problem that he now works so slowly that it makes him very easy to plagiarize. Like The Grandmaster is a film about Ip Man, who was the martial arts instructor who trained Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee.
Yeah. And he spent so long working on The Grandmaster that by the time it got released, I think 90% of the Chinese film industry was like biopics of Ip Man. It's like everyone made one because he announced it so early. And in the staggeringly long time it took for him to make the thing, everyone got theirs out first.
I mean, there's room for him, but he seems to not kind of engage with the rest of the industry as a functioning workspace, as a recognized structure, as a recognized timetable. When he doesn't,
yeah, and
does
part of me
kind
of admires that in this world where, like, you look at the release schedules even just 2 or 3 years down the line, and it's like untitled Universal film, untitled Disney film. The studios are getting release dates ready before they know what the film is. So
and it's going to be a superhero film anyway. So
it probably is. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to guess for very long.
I know I'm not the right audience, but at the same time, come on, man. But that's probably the antithesis of Wong Kar-Wai, isn't it?
Exactly.
Because he's all about exploration and a slow development and growth, and then seeding the next project, and it's all very natural rhythms. Whereas, from what you're saying, the Hollywood is just like, okay, this is going to happen now. We'll find people to make a film at some point before then, and then I don't know what it's going to be, but we're going to book the schedules. And it's just like, Jesus Christ, that's the industry, the purest form of industry, film industry.
Yeah, and you would think, like, that whole ethos that in Hollywood the film isn't released when it's ready, it's released when it's due. That has been getting worse and worse for about 20 years now. And you would think staring at the nightmare-inducing unfinished CGI of Tom Hooper's cats would lead to an industry-wide realization that this is a bad idea. But
absolutely, and yet it still goes on.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really sad. It just, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an appropriate comparison there of something where it's just, I suppose, like Stockaken and Waterman will be one of them, where it's just literally a factory that churns stuff out and all the stuff sounds the same, and that was probably one of the earliest examples of that happening in the pop charts, like an actual factory, and they called it a hit factory. Literally, they would churn it out. And
to quote Clive Anderson, one letter shy, but never mind.
yeah, it's I think there's definitely room for Wong Kar-Wai, but I don't feel like this film was it.
Yeah, I think so, because I mean, aside from anything else, I suppose it's one of those biases that you can't get around. But when I watch his Hong Kong films, I'm not scrutinizing them to see if they're a realistic portrayal of Hong Kong life, because I don't know what that would be. So I just accept them as they are. Whereas when a foreign director comes over to America or Britain, it becomes a sort of sport to try and work out if they've got it right, as if there's like one version of the country that you have to do. And it's
and I think that's a mistake. Yeah. I think I feel like his in particular, I've known it, I've sort of seen, we see it in directors that try to from abroad, that try to slot themselves into the Hollywood rigid, really rigid structure and formalities, and they sort of, you know, they manage okay, or they, you know, there's differences that we can take the piss out of, or with a little bit more understanding, sort of perceive what's actually happened. And I think with Wong Kar-Wai, I feel like he's much more delicate and sensitive than that, and this has just hampered any. I think you need certain conditions to grow a beautiful orchid, and these conditions that he needs as an artist just weren't met.
Wong Kar-Wai is just every type of plant in your world, isn't he?
He is, though. He gives out light and he gives out beauty, but if you can't do that if you hamper him in any way, it won't be produced. It's like these plants that just only grow every 12 years after a forest fire or something, and they're the only thing that'll grow under these particular conditions. And I think it's the same with him. He's not going to flourish in that environment. So this is probably Hollywood going, oh yeah, he's really cool, let's get him, you know, everybody's rating him. But oh, by the way, while you're here, you will need to do this. And Wong Kar-Wai is just like, yeah, I can't do that. I'm afraid I'll do my best, obviously, but that's not going to happen.
Is that there was a recurring thing in the American reviews from the time that I read, where they said, "Oh, it's a very," and they said this is a criticism. It's a very romanticized version of America, isn't it? It's not very realistic. And it's like, you know what? I think he knows. I think he is broadly aware that this movie about how blueberry pie is a metaphor for life choices is not exactly Taxi Driver. I think he knows that.
Yeah, it's absolutely not Taxi Driver at all. I don't know. I just and it's not like there's not stuff happening, and it is quite picaresque, and which, you know, by nature is a rambling thing, but
let's talk about some of those stops on those journeys, because it feels like as Norah Jones's character Lizzie travels across America, she makes a point to stop and work at every bar that has an Oscar-winning actor as a regular customer.
Which is a very thorough research on her part.
Defo, yes. The first one, and I think like the best stretch of the film by a long way, is the bit with Rachel Weisz and David Straithairn.
Oh God, that drove me flipping insane, that bit. I know David Straithairn, I like him. I do like, and I like Rachel Weisz, but I just thought that this whole thing is, it just feels like really burnt, like overdone, like left out in the sun too long, and trying to, like somebody who doesn't live in America, thinking, oh well, what do two characters in America sound like? Well, one's probably an alcoholic, and one's probably, you know, I'm going to come down on her because she might or might not have had an affair at the wrong time. And it just felt like, it just made me want to puke.
I didn't feel like he was coming down on the Rachel Weisz character, by the way. I think that is just a mutually toxic couple. I thought they were both, you know, it's sort of, I mean, it's set in Tennessee.
The reason I say that is because the other woman's the same. She's also criticized for her choices. The gambling woman, played by Natalie Portman.
I mean, she is a gambling addict, right? It's not the best choice.
No, but David Straithairn says, I feel like the scenes that you see him and his wife arguing, the scenes that you see him in, he comes across as just like, oh, he's just a guy and he's trying to do the right thing. And then later on with Natalie Portman, she goes to the hospital, and her dad is just a guy trying to do the right thing. and just being beset on all sides by women who, you know, have their own minds.
Yeah, I think that there is an element of that. I think it's a very,
It's really
particularly
tiring.
in Strathern's character, it's a very kind of mythologized portrayal of alcoholism. Like the first time you see him, he's like slumped over at the bar, and you don't see his face until he has his first close-up, and he raises it so slowly. And I genuinely felt it was like a curtain call. I wanted to hear like an audience applauding and throwing roses to him, because it's just got that feel to it.
I mean, if it had been an American sitcom, that would have happened.
He's
Like,
not.
oh yeah, all right, Strathern.
Yes,
Here it comes.
absolutely.
Enter Strathern, stage left.
I don't know. I felt like those segments at least had the kind of atmosphere that I think my main problem with the film is that the wraparound segment with Jude Law just doesn't work for me. I don't find this a convincing environment. I don't believe in his connection with Norah Jones's character at all.
Or who puts those keys in that jar either. I completely agree. I don't believe that he remembers the stories of everybody placing a key in that jar. Come on, it's Jude flipping Law. He's just got through a raft full of ladies in the meantime. You know, he doesn't remember them all. Come on.
I wanted there to be a bit, well, as he said, so is anything in this diner not a metaphor?
Yeah, exactly. And when he was talking about that story, it just didn't sit well on my stomach at all. I just thought he wouldn't talk like that. It wouldn't be, and that sort of made me wonder whether that was an intersection of cultures that didn't quite come across. I don't know whether that be something that would work better in the circumstances of his origin country, or whether he'd kind of really argued for that to be in place in this film, but it just wasn't going to come off.
It's funny that, yeah, most Wong Kar-Wai films take place in this very kind of heightened romantic world that allows you to look at the characters within inverted commas. Like if Faye Wong's character from Chungking Express was a real person, you'd call the cops. She is absolutely a stalker. I don't care what anyone says. But you know, within the context of the film, you're aware that there's something slightly off about her, but you suspend judgment because it's not a realistic, primarily realistic film. And I just feel like that is such a hard tone to strike that it's almost self-defeating to do it in a culture that isn't yours.
It is, and once you've got the right glasses on, you can sort of see through things like that, and it's such a judgment call. Like in any play, in any film, you're asked to suspend disbelief. It's just how far you push your audience to do that, and I think that it can sometimes run into real problems. And I felt that during this whole show. I mean, what saves it is his really creative cinematography, which is beautiful, and I love the saturated colors, and I love, you know, the metaphor for things moving on and being transient, and nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful work of art in that respect.
It's a gorgeous looking film. It's his first with Darius Khondji as cinematographer, and it's notable because before he was like almost attached at the hip to Christopher Doyle, the Australian cinematographer. And I think it's great when filmmakers have a close collaboration with a cinematographer or an editor or someone behind the scenes like that. But you know, there are people who saw Doyle's other work and saw that it has that same color palette and sort of wanted to take the credit away from Kar-Wai. But I think looking at his work with Darius Khondji here, who's also a great cinematographer, but a very different Wanda Doyle, you can see that actually a lot of Kar-Wai's style is Kar-Wai.
Cool. I'm a big fan of sort of saturated colours, I think. and it's sort of the way they bleed into each other, and it's just the whole transience of the piece. I really like that idea of travel and not sort of being able to put down roots and things popping in and out, but that unfortunately doesn't make for a robust structure.
No, absolutely not. No. And I think by the time you've got into the last half hour, you just want there to be some closure. Like I don't think the Natalie Portman section is bad, but I couldn't get invested in it because I just didn't want to meet another cast of people by that stage.
I liked her character. I thought she was nice and ebullient, but
I think she's not bad in this too. And this was at
yeah,
the
I
height.
still was. Yeah,
This
no,
is
I do like her. I think she's good in this, but again, I wasn't massively convinced by the storyline, really.
Yeah, and I think this was at the height of the time where I had a few problems with Portman. I thought she was very sort of fidgety and affected in a lot of her work, but I think she's fine in this actually. Yeah, I think she's really strong.
She's not twitchy. She's a lot more forceful as a character, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's internal acting, which is, much far preferable to, I know this is a reference that about 3 other people will get, but good God, what she was like in Paris Je t'aime, bloody hell. Again, no, it's not going to be something that everyone relates to, but it still haunts my nightmares.
I've got that sitting downstairs and it's been there for a while. I have not watched it yet.
Some of it's great. It's it's like every anthology film. It's a curate's egg. There's a great Sylvain Chomet film about a tragic warning about our prejudice against mimes. That's fantastic. But
justified. Dun 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 dun. Mime. At the bottom of the artistic community, justifiably.
You would absolutely be on that village council in Hot Fuzz, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would. Yes. Yes, I would.
So yeah,
the script I thought was pretty turgid as well, and I couldn't remember who it was that I'd seen a script by somebody, and is it Zack Snyder? No, it's not Zack Snyder. It's somebody who's the son of somebody and is 20 and has churned out scripts and thinks that he's got into Hollywood on merit.
Oh shit, Max Landis then. I mean,
yes!
don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people in Hollywood like that, but there's no one quite like Max Landis.
Yeah, I know. And I've seen I've seen his writing previously, and parts of this film made me think, who wrote this? Who wrote this? Somebody with no bloody experience of life whatsoever, who thinks that that's, the phrases that these people are uttering are somehow true to life. And I felt like, periodically somebody should hold up a notice going, message. Did you get the message? Do you understand what I'm saying here? I'm being symbolic. Oh
the diner scenes are absolutely like that. Yeah. And I think part of the problem again is you've got this clash of tones that whatever Kar-Wai thought he was doing, I think part of the problem is that his co-writer is Lawrence Block, and Block is not a bad writer. He's actually a very good novelist, but a very good writer of hard-boiled crime stories. And somehow
not an ideal collaborator in this context.
No, his kind of, I think both him and Kar-Wai are not realist writers, which is fine, but Block's form of anti-realism and Kar-Wai's form of anti-realism just do not gel.
No. I think at one point, Norah Jones's character says, I've always been fascinated by card players. And since when? Like since about 2 minutes ago. Where's this come from?
That made me think that the actual co-writer of the script was Louis Theroux, because the only person I've ever come across who has that sort of, I've always been fascinated by insert literally anything here, is Louis Theroux.
Yeah. So yeah, it
But
was interesting that in terms of selfhood and becoming, I thought I felt like she needed to go on this journey, and I didn't get much of a sense of why. Honestly, I didn't get the impetus for her going on the journey was particularly strong, but I understood that she went on this journey and she chose a different name in every location, some variety of Elizabeth, whether it was Betty, Lizzie, Beth. She was Betty at one point. That was pretty cool.
yeah.
And it's all about finding yourself and hitting the road and all that business, which is a very American road movie thing to do. So maybe that was, something that had been seen from afar, and this is what Americans do. Yeah, I thought that was an appropriate thing to do.
But you're
Search
right
for identity, but
you're right that it isn't set up. I think the main thing
no.
we know about Lizzie after the first scene of the film is that she has recently had a relationship breakup and she has no
Yeah.
particular objection to blueberry pie.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, basically. And for an actress in a Hollywood movie to even see her eating, genuinely eating, is remarkable.
Have you seen A Ghost Story by David Lowery?
Maybe.
There is that famous scene in it where Rooney Mara just sits down and eats an entire pie, and you wait and watch as she eats literally the entire pie. And it's,
And
I
she's
mean,
like this.
yeah, it's technically a stunt. They probably had to
Yes.
get like insurance coverage for this.
Yeah. How many takes did that take?
Yes.
I remember, what was that thing that I saw? Because I'm a big fan of, I love Drew Barrymore. It's just very easy watching, and she's a good comedian. And what did I see her in? The one where she's Josie Grossi.
Oh, Never Been Kissed.
Yes, it's the sweetest film. And she goes back to school, and then she goes to this party, and afterwards she accidentally has some weed, and afterwards eats a large amount of cake, and she just genuinely ate it, and it was great to see. It was really good to see, just like, yes, I've been there, I've had those afternoons.
I am reminded of when Olivia Colman was on the Oscar campaign trail for The Favourite, and she was talking about the weight she put on for that film. And I think
Cake.
everyone was expecting her to sort of talk about it in intense and methody, sort of Christian Bale terms. You know, that was great. I just sat down and I ate a lot of cake, and I didn't do any exercise for 2 months. It was brilliant.
She did have to really sort of stuff the cake in that, didn't she?
She did, yes, although most of it came back up. So I guess it's probably evens, right?
I know. Ah, that poor woman, she had a lot to go through, apart from being royal and very rich.
Yes.
I think, what did you think about, when during this film and the film pacing, like, I don't know whether, it's in the editing process and it takes on an interesting pace. It's kind of staccato for a bit when people tend to be on their own in the frame. What do we think about that?
Firstly, I found that pretty effective, but I also wonder whether part of it is because the version of this that screened at the Cannes Film Festival, which was the premiere, was about 15 minutes longer. And part of me wonders whether that was maybe, part of the sacrifice that was made. There was apparently a whole bit in it. I don't know whether it was cut at script stage or whether they filmed any of it, but there was a whole bit of it that was going to be set in New Orleans. And Kar-Wai was talking that up as if it was going to be his next kind of domino project. Oh, I cut the New Orleans bit, but I'm going to make it into my next film. And then the reception to this made him think, oh, if I could go back to Hong Kong, I could do that as well.
I think that for me was a bit annoying.
Right.
It felt like it happened so frequently, and I couldn't really see the point of it. I don't know whether it was faster or slower.
Oh, you mean the kind of the step printing thing he did where you see a movement as almost like a series of still frames. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And I didn't know what the point of it was.
It's just part of his style, I think. I think he has used it very effectively in the past, but in My Blueberry Nights, there's a bit where they use this for a shot of someone opening then closing a door, which I think is overdoing it.
It was, and I was trying to figure out what he was trying to draw attention to there. It was something about, I wonder if it's like, you know, when he said at the beginning, the keys are in the jar. If I throw these keys away, those doors will be closed forever.
Oh,
Which
yeah,
incidentally did make me
maybe.
want to puke. Because no Jude Law character of that age would ever remotely say such a thing. If it's somebody who's like, you know, an older person, maybe I can agree with that. But maybe that was sort of a depiction of what he meant, somebody who's kind of reluctant to close a door, perhaps.
Maybe, yeah. I found that very stylish on the big screen, but when you watch it on streaming, you do sort of think, oh shit, is this buffering?
Yeah, I liked that. I liked the fact that it was unusual in a film and it seemed to be saying something. I wish it was saying something better. I did quite like it as an idea, as a direction and editing an idea. Yeah.
So the main,
and also, sorry, carry on. No, carry on.
Well, the main thread we haven't pulled on so far is Norah Jones. We haven't really talked much about Norah Jones.
Yeah, I don't feel like she's an actor. I feel like obviously this is her first film, I'm guessing. I think it was.
Yeah.
Didn't I read that? Yeah. So, and I think she's still very, maybe he wanted her to be like really naturalistic and very sort of as she would be, quite inexperienced, kind of an ingenue. I think sometimes the things that she's trying to convey about, you know, identity aren't really coming across. But then again, maybe she's not supposed to be a particularly deep character. She's like footloose and fancy free. She sort of dips in and out of people's lives. She doesn't have any major reactions to things. And when she's supposed to be crying at one point, but it's not very convincing, so we kind of slow it down and you know, make it more moody because it's not convincing at normal speed.
yeah, I know what you mean. Kar-Wai was a big fan of Norah Jones's music and suggested, and boy, we're going to get to the heart of the problem here. I think suggested that because she was such a natural, she should not take any acting lessons before she did this. Which, good plan, paid off.
Yeah, I read that and I thought they're two very, very different art forms.
Yeah.
I think you can't just magically become a great film actor just because you've written some and sung some really great quality songs.
I mean, the irony is that Norah Jones hates being on camera so much, she even hates doing music videos.
Yeah, it's a shame. And she does look so young in this.
Yeah, she does actually. I don't know that. This is how I always think of Norah Jones because I haven't particularly followed her career. So the way she looks in this, when she like just had her breakthrough with "Come Away With Me," is just my picture of what she looks like. So that I didn't really think about that.
That album is so beautiful. Honestly, it's a particular mood, and you have to be in a particular mood to listen to it. And it's a really comforting, lovely, warm, soulful album. It's beautiful. But to see her in this where there's nothing deep at all is quite a contrast.
I think it's kind of part of the problem is maybe having a novelist as your co-writer, because in a novel it's very easy to have a viewpoint character who just observes things, and that can be fine. You know, there are many great books that work like
Which is
that.
her character.
Yeah, that is absolutely it. But in a film, you need to have a lead character who does something to win the audience's sympathy. Yeah,
it's not just an observer. And she's a similar kind of artist, I would argue, to Wong Kar-Wai, in that she, in her own environment, she just flourishes like, you know, the most
Which
beautiful
plant's it
kind
going to
of
be this time?
orchid.
Orchid. Good.
The most beautiful kind of like flower, and maybe an African violet, just because it's much more soft and like almost like a plant that if it could hug you, it would hug you, and it's deep, rich colors. And I don't I don't know why he would collaborate with a hard-boiled detective novelist writer.
It's quite
Why
weird,
would you
isn't
do
it? I mean, some of
an odd pairing?
his Hong Kong films, particularly Fallen Angels, have that kind of vibe, but this doesn't. So, you know,
Mm,
it's just the
yeah,
wrong match of people in general, I think.
yeah, and a lot of it can just depend on who's available at the time, and you don't have the ideal circumstances, and I can only assume that maybe that's what's happened here.
I think that he probably had his pick of collaborators because his stock was very, very high by the mid 2000s. But it's just, I don't know, maybe there's just some sort of cultural barrier where he couldn't see that the story he was doing was not a story that Bloch's skills were transferable to, that you can't have these lovelorn diner patrons talking like, you know, alcoholic detectives all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's My Blueberry Nights. Do you have any other thoughts, any other flowers that you haven't used?
I would like to sort of highlight Try a Little Tenderness by Otis Redding, which kept popping up endlessly.
Yeah.
And I thought it was overused. And also when it was happening, I was thinking, I know it's not going to, but I really want Jay-Z to kick in at some point. Like, you know, sounds so soulful, don't you agree? And it didn't. I was just like, no. There's just even more things that are missing from this film.
I suppose I was less bothered by that because I know Wong Kar-Wai does like to use needle drops as kind of a running motif, most famously. Like, if you watch Chungking Express, you will never need to hear California Dreaming by the Mamas and Papas ever again in your life. I promise you that. But
does he get a bit obsessed with it throughout the film?
yeah, definitely. In fairness,
Okay.
the character who plays it is obsessive as well, so there's a meaning for it to keep cropping up there. But Sarah, I put it to you: who was ever disappointed to hear you Try a Little Tenderness one more time?
Yeah, I know, and it's a phenomenally great song. But I don't want it to be the only song in a soundtrack. And at one point, it felt like it might be the only song that they were going to play for the rest of the film. I thought, please change the tune. Another thing I was going to say was both Rachel Weisz and Norah Jones seem to have a problem getting hair out of their face. And at one point, I thought this has got to be an artistic choice, because every bloody shot with them, and it's just like this long lingering shot with like hair down here, and just like they can't even, you know, get Veronica Lake in or something. But this is just annoying. Just get the hair out of your face. It's ridiculous. You can't say this is a directorial choice. This isn't the actors. And I don't know any woman who wouldn't go, oh, fucking hell.
I suppose it's particularly problematic for Jones's character because she drives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tricky. And also, I think the big thing that needs to be addressed is the weirdness. And I don't know whether you necessarily notice this, but maybe I would think that you probably would notice that this a woman, and she's asleep.
Oh, fucking hell, yes.
Yeah, weird,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Weird.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so she falls asleep on the bar. She's had pie, so obviously it's sleepy nap time. And she falls asleep on the bar, and he kisses her, and But more than that, she's got like pie all over her face and
Yeah.
like cream on the pie all over the face, and he licks that off. And then later on, I think the same sort of thing happens, is it? And it's just filth. It's pure filth.
It made me wonder whether Wong Kar-Wai would find like an issue of the Bash Street Kids featuring Fatty to be similarly erotic, because he often ends up in that situation, doesn't he, with pie all over his face.
Yeah, and I think it does, nowadays, probably not in 2007, but probably nowadays they would have issues of consent. I mean, she does seem to sort of come around a little bit in the second instance of this happening. But
she comes around and kisses him back, which I think even if the person kissing you while you're asleep is Jude Law, I don't think many women would be as sublimely untroubled by that.
Yeah, so it's a bit sort of questionable now.
Yeah.
And the shots of the blueberry pie, you get actual slow-mo shots of blueberry pie, and I feel like that's kind of, being brought out as like the link of romance and sex and food and the sort of sensuality of that.
No,
And
yeah, definitely.
you're getting shots of this beautiful blueberry pie and the luscious fruit on the inside and the great pastry, and then suddenly like this sort of the drips of cream fall on it, and that's the filth of this film. That's filthy. Yeah, I thought that was probably not necessary, and it just felt like, oh, come on, Wong Kar, we're not 12.
Yeah, I remember those shots of pie looking fantastic when I saw it on the big screen, but watching it like super compressed on Jeff Bezos's hell site did it gave it a sort of weird body horror air, didn't it? This would be a good opening credits for one of those comedy horror films that begins with shots of something that looks like, mashed up intestines and then pulls out, aha, it's something different. It wasn't as mouth-watering on a small screen, I thought.
So in summation, would you sort of say this could you recommend this film for anything?
I mean, I think if you're a Kar-Wai fan, there's plenty of stuff that's of interest here. I think some of the supporting performances, particularly Weisz and Straithairn, are really strong and seem to get the vibe that the material should have more, perhaps, than anyone behind the camera could. But if you're going to go into his work for the first time, for the love of God, watch In the Mood for Love rather than this. That is a much better entry point.
Yeah.
Also, definitely listen to that Cat Power album.
Oh yeah, Cat Power.
Yeah.
I need to watch that and Chungking Express, don't I? Because I've not seen any Wong Kar-Wai. And if there's other people out there this is their first introduction to it, they're going to just go, yeah, maybe I won't. But according to you, we should.
You should press on. Yeah, I don't know. Like, even with this being an English language debut and that being traditionally a play for a broader market, I don't know. I can't imagine even Norah Jones fans going to this instead of Chungking Express or Fallen Angels or something, or Happy Together. Happy Together's brill.
Okay, so I'll make a note of them. But I think this probably isn't, unless you're a super fan, it's probably not a great place to stay.
It is not great, and I think the failure of it is kind of a shame, but there is some sort of parallel universe where Wong Kar-Wai spends the rest of his career in America, and I don't want to live in that universe, so maybe it's for the best.
Yeah, indeed. He's a delicate flower.
He is. Of many different species.
Many, and trees.
Yeah. So listeners, if you enjoyed what you just heard, we have a Patreon where you can get a monthly bonus episode, as well as exclusive access to our other movie podcast, Director's Lottery, my twice-weekly Doctor Who reviews, and much, much more. That's all at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. But until next week, I've been Graham.
And I've been Sarah.
And we'll see you for more Pop Screen next week.
Bye.